Thank you all for attending. I will jump right in. What I want to talk about in general is the history and the kind of short-term future of wireless systems and 6G communications. When in 1991, when we filed our patent, or we filed it in 1992, but we wrote this in 1991, personal communication networks are networks that allow individuals and equipment to exchange information with each other anywhere at any time through voice, data, or video. So, we wanted we envisioned the world where everything can, or anything can talk to anything, somehow. And, basically with that, the evolution of the Internet of Things, and considering that people are things, we get this perspective. So there was pre-internet, which was human to human, and maybe before, communications, wired communications, we had to communicate personally. Then we got, as in human to human. Then we got into the internet, and we could do, things, first it was email, we shared information, we did very little entertainment. Then we did Internet of Service, and we called it Web 2, and we had productivity tools, e-commerce, and so on. In the late 1990s, probably 2005 was the start of it in a big way. We got into the Internet of People, which is social media. And in 1999, the term Internet of Things were introduced, specifically addressing the issue of machines and devices communicating together. In the late 1980s, and I was in Canada at the time, I would come home after a day of work, and I would turn on my PC and would connect to the internet via a modem. Back then, we had to dial rotary, and we would get a shriek in our ears when we connected to the modem. Very often it was busy, or we didn't connect. And when we connected to the modem, then we would hit carriage return on our modem, our computer, and we would hear them talking to each other. Then we made sure that the handset was placed in a kind of receiver that had two rubber thingies that we put around the headphone, the headpiece, and the mouthpiece. And we would connect anywhere from 300 to, in the early days, 1200 bits per second. And we were very happy with 1200. And all we had at that time in the late 80s was news. We had a site called News. Of course, there was no mouse, there was no graphics at all on the internet, it was just words. And we'd connect, and most modems at that time worked with frequency shift keying. So it used different frequencies to send a 1 or a 0. And that's how things looked like at the time. This is the device that had the two rubber pieces. That's what we put the handset in. And then we had the first generation of cell phones. The first generation of cell phones didn't make it into the Middle East. And I don't know why it's gone to, and it's going fast. 1 second. I will just stop it. So the first generation of cell phones didn't make it in the Middle East. It was basically FM phones. If you had an FM receiver, you could tune it to the right frequency and listen. There was no encryption, no digitization, nothing. It was just simple FM. Very quickly, it ran out of capacity. It was using 45 kilohertz channel per user, so it was very inefficient. At that time, about 1992, the IEEE started work on the 802.11 standard. And the 802.11 was the first wireless Wi-Fi standard. Now, Wi-Fi is wireless fidelity. It's different than the 802.11. It's a group that ensures that wireless devices talk to each other. But in any case, so by 1997, the IEEE had made its first standard on wireless LANs, and that standard was 1 or 2 megabits per second, and it was direct sequence or frequency hopping technologies. It was in the 900 megahertz channel that was not available in most of the world, and the 2.4 gigahertz channel, which is available for most countries. Now, the interesting thing in history, it's called the 802.11 DFW. Only those in the know what that means, because they gave it a technical meaning, but it really wasn't anything technical. It's the call code for the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas airport. And basically, they couldn't agree on anything. So, and they couldn't agree where to meet. Finally, they decided to meet in the airport, and that's where the meeting was held, and that's where the standard was approved. Just very quickly, what direct sequence spread spectrum is, because that's very relevant to all the standards now. Basically, the information, the digital information is multiplied, every one is multiplied times a code. The code is an odd number of bits, generally 2 to the n minus 1, so 7 or 15 or 31 or 255. And the code is a semi-random or a quasi-random code that when one uses multiple codes at the same time, if you multiply times the code in the receiver, you recover the data, only the data that is relevant to the code you were using. So you can have it as a multiple access system where many users can be talking at the same time. The advantage of direct sequence spread spectrum is that the signal, it can be buried in the noise, because basically you're sending it over 255 times 2, you know, depending on how many frequencies you're using, but it's times 2 frequencies at the same time. So, you know, the power density per carrier is very low, and that way you can hide the signal below noise. So this was a covert communication system after the Second World War. So that's how the spectrum would look like. The blue one is how the data would look like originally. The, you know, sort of purple one is how the data looks after it's spread. The frequency hopping spread spectrum was actually invented by an actress named Hedy Lamarr. The story is rather interesting. She was visiting a friend, a composer, and she heard a piano play. So she told him, "What's the piano playing?" He said, "It's a note, you know, so basically it's playing by itself." She said, "I know it's a note. I don't know the piece it's playing, the music." So he said, "Oh, this is a special music. I have a function. So based on the last 2 notes, I must do something, and I decide the next note." She was very familiar with weaponry, because her husband, the first husband, was an arms dealer from Austria. So basically, she had overheard over a dinner table that the torpedoes were controlled just like remote controlled cars. So torpedoes were controlled like that, and the British were able to jam the transmitter. So she thought, if we moved the frequency of the transmitter and the receiver together, and only the receiver knows where the next one is, we can cheat these jammers. And they did that, her and George Untitled, the composer, and developed this technology. You know, just as a...
The screen is not There's some problem with screen sharing. Your
Oh,
presentation
okay, 1 second.
is not here anymore.
Okay, 1 second. Is it back?
It's almost back. Yes, it's back, but it's not full screen. Probably.
Okay,
Yeah, but we can see it. We can see it now. But it's not on slideshow mode.
Let me try the slideshow. I don't know what I pressed. It's moving too fast, and I don't want to horse around with it. Yeah. So in 1997, I learned, so she invented this in 1943 during the Second World War. So in 1997, I learned that she never got compensated for her patent and she was extremely poor. So I made a deal with her where I paid her about $250,000 over 9 months or 10 quarters, so 2.5 years. And that way she made some money and we used her name for marketing in any case. So frequency hopping spread spectrum is the concept of jumping the frequency of the transmitter, and of course the receiver jumps with it, and that way you can get the communications done. Code division multiple access was invented by the US Army in the 60s, and it was basically a way, as we said, to use the the direct sequence spread spectrum, the one I described before the frequency hopping. And basically each user gets a different code, and that way many users can talk at the same time. A company in the US called Qualcomm sort of, and this is a trick in business, they invented about 300 patents around the US Army patent and basically forced the industry to pay them a lot of money for this development, when in reality they didn't own the technology and didn't, really invent it. It was invented long before them. In 1988, the Telecommunications Industry Association realized that having phones, without any encryption was very bad. So they wanted to introduce digital mobile phones, and a number of standards were proposed. The GSM wasn't proposed. Something called CT2 and CT2 Plus were proposed. CDMA was proposed, and there were two other, less. There was one called IS-54 and a sixth one. In any case, I was very lucky at the time. I was hired by a mobile operator, and then that mobile operator bought the biggest cell phone company manufacturer in the world at the time. And I was tasked with defining the best 2G technology. So that gave me a chance to study all the 2G technologies, and we concluded that GSM, and that was in 1989, that GSM was the best 2G technology, but the problem, back then it wasn't available. IS-54 is an interim standard, something between the first generation and the second generation, and that was available, and we decided that they should use that if they want to be the first to launch. Now, it's very relevant what happened here. During this, I studied, as I said, all the 6 technologies, and I wrote in my report, which recommended GSM, that all these technologies were bad. And they, my PhD is in physics. So they told me, you physicists are telling the best guys in telecommunications that their best technology is bad. And I said, yes. I was very much into the internet, and I was trying to use modems after modems all the time. Like, I'm always upgraded my modem. And I realized if if people tasted 250 kilobits per second, which was the most GSM can do, they will not be satisfied. You know, as soon as they could do video, but not good video, they will be upset. So I knew that we needed faster and better technologies. And they challenged us, me and my partner, Michel, to find a better technology. I don't like challenges. I like to do my business. But Michel took the challenge, and shortly thereafter, he recommended to me the OFDM technology. And I will talk about that later. With 2G got introduced the SIM card, the subscriber identification module. And on the SIM card is the private key for encryption, the, of course, private key and the public key with it, as well as it is basically a storage device. Some is storage that you cannot change, which is the electronic information of the card, and what you can store on it are phone numbers and other things. Now, CDMA became a standard in America and Korea and Japan, I believe. GSM, basically covered the whole world. And the CDMA had the problem that it was relatively inefficient. You used the big band and you had a very low data rate. So Michel and I suggested we use what's called multi-code direct sequence spread spectrum, where basically we allow the user to use more than one code. Now, this is a good time to explain, because this is key to understanding how high speed is done anywhere in the world today. If you did one carrier of information and put all the data on it, like the speeds we're talking about these days for 5G, say 3 gigabits per second, each bit, when it's transmitted, echoes in the environment. It hits buildings, it hits anything, and it comes back. The length of the echo could be in the range of, a few hundred microseconds. If the data is 3 gigabits per second, that's 0.3 of a nanosecond. So a bit can be influencing up to 10,000 bits. The echo can reach 10,000 bits. To remove that, you've got to process 10,000 to the power squared, so 100 million, in the duration of a bit, which is 0.3 nanoseconds. We don't have the processing power anywhere in any telephone to be able to do this. So what was the solution? To break the data into few channels. OFDM uses frequency channels, multi-code uses code channels. So, you break the information into channels. Each channel is at a manageable rate where you can do the equalization, meaning removes this echoing, and collectively in mathematics, you've turned the problem from n squared problem to n log n problem. And that, makes it possible, very possible, to communicate, and to clean the communications. So basically, we invented it for OFDM first in 1992 and for direct sequence in 1995. There were three basic problems. I'm not going to get into them, they're technical. There were three basic problems that prevented people from doing this. They couldn't do it. And we solved the three problems, two of them intentionally and one unintentionally. When you do hard work, God rewards you. So, we got patents on both and, led the world with that. As soon as we solved the problem of multicode, 3G got introduced in 2000, and 3G is primarily CDMA, like multicode CDMA. Now, interesting point, 3G is supposed to be the last technology. There is not supposed to be 4G, 5G, and all the other Gs, because we had the first generation, which was analog, the second generation, which was digital, and the third generation is high-speed digital. what is after high speed? Ultra high speed, it was not appropriate to do that. So actually all standards after 3G are approved by the 3G Partnership Project Group. So they really are all variations of the 3G standard. We were first to actually push for using the term 4G for above 10 megabits per second, and we succeeded. And basically these are marketing terms. These are not, engineering terms. So OFDM is the concept of using frequency channels, adjacent frequency channels. I just want to say, for example, in FM radio, if you're listening to the channel 98.2, the information is in 50 kilohertz, but the channel bandwidth is 200 kilohertz. The reason for the extra 150 is to put a guard band, 75 kilohertz from this side, 75 kilohertz from this side. In case the receiver is not tuned right, it will not pick the wrong channel. Now, if you give all the frequencies to a single user, you don't have to do this. Now, it's not that we make one wideband. No, if we're saying, if you give all the channels to a single user, you don't have to give this guard band. So that's immediately, you can send 4 times the data. So that's a big improvement. Now, because they are done, these channels are done mathematically, they are done in a computer, they are perfectly orthogonal to each other. They don't interfere with each other at all. That introduced another about 10 times. So OFDM can do 40 times what a regular single channel system can do. So it's 40 times more efficient than a single carrier channel. And that on top of the single carrier cannot do very high speeds. It made OFDM the technique for the future. OFDM has been proven to be the most efficient communication technique. So, there is nothing after OFDM in efficiency. You can not use OFDM for other reasons, but if you're interested in efficiency of the channel, OFDM is the best. In 1997, the IEEE started working on introducing OFDM in communications in the wireless LANs. And in 1998, the IEEE asked our permission to use our patent in the 802.11a standard, and then G and so on. MIMO technology is the multiple input, multiple output, and it's basically the concept of using multiple antennas to either transmit replicas of, they can transmit different data rates or different data, or they can they be aligned with each other to shape and form the transmitted signal. If you're shaping the signal, you can go further. If you put different data on each antenna, then you get higher data rates. So, MIMO systems can be very, very fast. We have Wi-Fi now systems that can operate at 3 gigabits per second, but that's really only in the first 2 meters. After that, it switches to shape and go further. So, but they are excellent systems. In 1999, Cisco wanted to introduce MIMO into Wi-Fi. That was impossible at the time. We had not even introduced OFDM. To introduce OFDM with MIMO in one go was an impossibility. So we actually fought them and stopped them from doing that. And eventually MIMO got introduced for the first time around 2007 or so. In 2002, my company WLAN, together with Nokia and Ensemble and the OFDM Forum, which was also a company controlled by WLAN, started the WiMAX Forum. And we started it to develop the first 4G technology. And we did, and by 2005, we had a 4G technology. Our idea back then was to help the poor countries. We wanted WiMAX to be the outdoor technology and Wi-Fi to be the indoor technology. We wanted WiMAX and Wi-Fi to be very close to each other, that very small changes in the chips can do both. So a single chip would be able to do the Wi-Fi and the WiMAX. So, you know, Wi-Fi chips, the whole chipset these days are $1, is $1. So, you know, it's a very inexpensive technology. If we can do WiMAX at the same rate, then it's wonderful. The problem with WiMAX, it didn't work well, you know, going from outside inside a house to the inside of a building. The multipass was very harsh on it, and it couldn't handle it well at the time. When we first made the Wi-Fi, the WiMAX standard, we knew this, and we didn't want it to be a general standard. We wanted it to be an outdoor standard only. Unfortunately, companies thought we were too conservative, and Intel took over the WiMAX forum and pushed for what's called OFDMA and tried to make the WiMAX standard work indoors and outdoors. They were cheated. A demo was done in Israel, where buildings are 1- and 2-story high. It worked very well. When they went to New York and installed it with a US company, it failed miserably. So, you know, WiMAX didn't live to the potential it could have lived to. Ironically, we used to tell people, you are either going into 4G with a revolution through WiMAX or through the long-term evolution of the cellular industry. We really were using that term as derogatory. We wanted to put it down. Eventually, they shortened this term into LTE, and it became the standard, the 4G standard. So 4G standard is based on, basically it's OFDM in the downlink, but the uplink uses a variation of 3G. So it's an excellent technology, and it lived to the potential of OFDM, but because the uplink is not OFDM, it's slower, and you can't get symmetric channels. Now, in the last 5 or 6 years, a lot of companies and people talked about 5G. Now, we want to stress that 4G is as fast as an individual needs. You don't need the speeds of 5G as an individual. A phone cannot receive more than 700 megabits per data, meaning cannot receive in a useful manner. If a phone has got 2 gigahertz processor, the most it can handle, because as it receives a bit, it's got to put it somewhere. It needs about 4 instructions to save a bit. So it cannot handle more than 700 megabits per second. So the speeds they're talking about, 3 gigabits per second and 30 gigabits per second, these are not for humans. These are for machines. Also, the delay in 4G is very acceptable. No one, when 4G is working at a full rate of 700 megabits per second, you don't notice any delay. But for automated cars, for robotics, and for doing an operation controlling surgical equipment, the delays can be catastrophic. So they wanted to introduce a 5G technology. My problem with the 5G technology is that even though they are promising that's not going to happen, is that we, the consumers, have to pay for it, but it's really not for us. It's for industrial applications more than for humans. And so basically it's for the city infrastructure, like, for long range control of, unmanned aerial vehicles. It's for all kinds of, applications that are not for individuals' use. There is virtual tourism, which is something, I'm actually pushing for myself. Basically, you don't have to go anywhere. you can, someone can be in the place and make images for you, and put a VR camera on or a VR monitor and, watch virtual reality monitor and, watch things from far. Internet of Things, of course, have come a long, long way. I mean, we in 2000 were doing the smart homes and so on. Now, we have agriculture systems where they put on the apple, on an individual apple, a sensor to decide the amount of humidity in the apple. If it's, so based on it, they decide if it needs water, if it needs chemicals or, nutrients, and so on. So, it's really become very pervasive in every aspect of life, kind of thing. Now, there are two things about 6G and the proposals for 6G. Most proposals now of 6G include blockchain, whether it's blockchain on the computer, on the phone, or blockchain in the central office. I was explaining yesterday that the central office is the most expensive piece of equipment in the telecommunications network, and it is what is prohibiting poor African countries from getting on the net and getting communications full stop. So a central office minimum price is about $500,000, and that's for a small mobile switching office. If you have only 2,000 users, you will never recover that money. So we decided that it's best to decentralize the central office. So we use a small computer. Some of them are $500, together with a small switch, $200, and some Wi-Fi equipment, $2,000. So for about less than $3,000, we can have the building block of a full telecommunications operator. And you put those together, you get a big operator. Now, the development in Wi-Fi that encouraged us a lot was this mesh technology. Mesh is the concept. Most of us have used the repeaters. The signal is not strong enough in a room in your house, so you buy a repeater. The mesh is an advancement, a big advancement over repeaters. We had invented the first mesh in 1997. We sold a lot to Airtel in India and then a few companies in South America. But it had a lot of problems. The mesh was very problematic in the sense of hidden nodes. A node hides for a while and appears, it makes the mesh useless. And we had to program the path. From 2007 to about 2015, a lot of developments were made. 2007, I say that because that's when the 11S standard was made, and that's a standard for mesh technology. The standard is a very bad standard. I hate to say, if you use it, the whole network drops to the lowest data rate in the network. So if one node is operating at 1 megabit per second, they all drop to 1 megabit per second. Now there are proprietary technologies, especially a company called Ubiquity. The Ubiquity technology makes each link at its rate. So, if we start from 700 megabits per second, you can get many links at 700 and half and so on. So it's a big advancement. Now, mesh is not restricted to Wi-Fi only. There are small cell LTE, and we've put mesh on it as well. So, what we want with the mesh is that we spread the internet with the mesh technology. So we don't spread the mesh with fiber or with, microwave. We spread it with its own with the LTE or with the Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is appropriate for Africa and for many countries because if they don't have communications, they don't have private Wi-Fi networks. They don't need them. So with that, if we introduce Wi-Fi as the carrier, no one will interfere with it because they have a vested interest to have it working. So, and Wi-Fi will be everywhere anyway. Why would they make their own Wi-Fi networks? So we've, we've worked on this concept. We demonstrated in a city, I keep forgetting the name, in Pakistan, on the border with Afghanistan. We've done a whole city with this concept and worked very, very well. So we're proposing a 6G standard based on mesh networks, blockchain, and enhanced cybersecurity. And that's basically the target from ourselves. Now, Nokia has proposed and China have proposed 1 terabit per second 6G, and that's excellent, but I don't see that useful for our countries in the short term. So I'm not focused on it at all. I'm focused on getting communications to those who don't have it. That's a simple diagram showing how the mesh would work and how it would be implemented. This is a comparison in prices. The mesh Wi-Fi is the cheapest by far. If it's purely a Wi-Fi technology, it's cheap. The speeds for different technologies. Now, 5G and Wi-Fi can provide the speeds of the early 5G now. 5G, we have to remember, is in two bands, below 6 gigahertz and around 60 gigahertz. The ones at the higher bands, of course, will go much, much faster, will go 30 gigabits per second. And basically, that's all I wanted to say. I'd be happy to address any questions or, go into depth into any of this. So, Dr. Adil, if you want to add anything, please go ahead.